Smoke thick enough to choke the stars swallowed the Montana sky that night. Flames raced through the dry grass, the night wind shoving them hard toward the neighbor's fence line. Riders exploded over the ridge, guns already drawn. 2 armed groups locked eyes across 20 yards of blackened earth, fingers tight on triggers, the air heavy, with smoke and the promise of blood. Into that deadly gap stepped a woman, torn work dress, calloused hands, face black with soot. She did not flinch. The wind shifted. Fire licked the firebrake. Triggers tightened further. Horses screamed as the blaze roared higher. Men on both sides shifted their weight, ready to fire. She took one more step forward. Her voice cut clean through the roaring night. The frost came early, that year in Montana territory, the kind that turned the grass to glass before sunrise. 1884. The sky still black. The rooster hadn't even bothered to wake up yet. But Rowena Blackwood was already awake. She always was, because someone had to be. The barn door stuck. It always stuck. Swollen wood, warped from a winter nobody had money to fix. Rowena threw her shoulder into it. Once, twice. It gave with a groan that sounded almost human, like the whole ranch was tired of standing. Inside, the cattle shifted. 12 head. Down from what used to be hundreds. Down from what her grandfather built with his own hands, back when the Blackwood name still meant something in this valley. Now it just meant work. Her work. She moved through the stalls with a lantern that gave off more smoke than light, checking hooves, checking water, checking the fence line that had been half mended with wire and prayer since October. Her hands were rough, rope-burned, calloused in places most 21-year-old women's hands had no business being calloused. But nobody asked her opinion on that. Nobody asked her opinion on much of anything. She could hear the house waking up behind her. Faint light in the upstairs window. Her sister's window. Camille's window. Because of course it was. The Blackwood house had 2 daughters in it. And only one of them was allowed to sleep past dawn. By the time the sun cracked over the ridge, Rowena had already mended 1 fence post, fed the horses and hauled 2 buckets of water, so cold it burned her fingers red. She wiped her hands on her skirt. The fabric was gray now. Used to be blue, she thought. A long time ago. Inside, the kitchen smelled like burnt coffee and old grease. Her stepmother, Verity Blackwood, stood at the stove with her back straight as a rifle barrel. "You're late," Verity said, not turning around. "I was fixing the south fence." "That's not your job." "It is when nobody else does it." Verity turned then. Slow. Deliberate. The kind of slow that made Rowena's stomach tighten before a single word was even said. "Watch your tone." "I don't have a tone. I have a fence that was falling down." Because that was the truth of it. Because somebody had to hold this place together with bare hands and borrowed time. Because pride didn't fix fences, and neither did Verity's cold stares. "Your sister," Verity said, "is getting dressed for a very important day. Mr. Garrison's son is coming to call. And you smell like a barn." "I smell like work. Same thing in this house, apparently." The words landed exactly where they were meant to land. Rowena felt them settle into that old familiar place in her chest. The place that used to ache. Didn't ache so much anymore. Just went numb instead. Which was worse if she was honest. She wasn't going to be honest with Verity, though. "I'll wash up," Rowena said instead. "See that you do. And Rowena," she paused at the door, "stay in the kitchen when the Garrisons arrive. You're not part of this. Not part of this." 3 words. Nothing new. Rowena had heard versions of that sentence her whole life. In different rooms. In different tones. From her father's mouth, from Verity's mouth, from the mirror some mornings, when she caught her own reflection, and didn't recognize the tired thing looking back. Not part of this. Fine. She'd stopped needing to be part of it years ago, or so she told herself. Camille's room was down the hall. Bigger. Brighter. A real bed instead of a straw pallet. A mirror that didn't crack down the middle. Rowena passed the open door on her way to wash up, and saw her sister sitting in front of that mirror, blonde curls already pinned into place, a blue silk dress laid across the bed like something sacred. "Is he really coming today?" Camille asked, not even glancing over. She knew Rowena was there. She always knew, just didn't care enough to look. "That's what I hear. Nathaniel Garrison." Camille said the name like it tasted sweet. "Do you know how big that ranch is? 20,000 acres. Maybe more." "I know. And he's not even married yet. Papa says he's choosing a wife. Finally, after years of turning down every eligible woman in the territory." "Good for him. Good for me," Camille corrected, finally turning to look at her sister. Her eyes swept over Rowena's dusty dress, her rough hands, her hair escaping its braid in every direction. "You should probably stay out of sight today." "Already been told." "Good." Camille turned back to the mirror. "Wouldn't want you scaring him off before I've even said hello." Rowena didn't answer, because there wasn't an answer that wouldn't start a fight. Because fights cost energy she didn't have to spare. Because in a few hours she still had a cattle buyer coming up from the valley, and her father had made it plain 2 nights running exactly what that sale needed to look like. So she walked away, let her sister have her mirror, let her sister have her silk dress, and her sweet-tasting name. Rowena had cattle to sell. The buyer's name was Dunmore, Cole Dunmore, a wide man with a wider hat and an even wider opinion of himself. He arrived at the south pasture around mid-morning with 2 hired men and a ledger book he kept flipping open like it held the word of God. Her father wanted the whole herd gone, all 12 head, not held back for breeding, not saved against next season the way any sensible rancher would have managed it. A note was coming due at the end of the month, and Ambrose Blackwood had decided the fastest way to look solvent was to look empty-handed, and paid up whatever that cost the ranch come spring. Rowena hadn't argued. There hadn't been anything to argue with. Just a debt she wasn't allowed to see the shape of yet, and instructions to sell. 12 head, Dunmore said, walking the fence line, barely glancing at the cattle. "Prices are down this season. Market's soft. I can give you $8 a head. Maybe 9 if I'm feeling generous." Rowena stood at the gate, arms crossed, boots planted. $9, she repeated. "For Hereford stock, fed on good grass all summer." "Times are hard, Miss Blackwood." "Times are hard for you, or hard for your wallet?" Dunmore's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, not quite annoyed either. Somewhere in between, like he wasn't used to being questioned by a woman standing in a torn work dress, with mud on her boots. "I'm offering a fair price. You're offering half of one. Now listen here." "No, you listen." Rowena stepped closer to the fence. Didn't raise her voice. Didn't need to. "I know what these cattle are worth in Bozeman. I know what they're worth in Helena. And I know you're hoping I don't, because you think a girl mending fences doesn't read the market report." Silence. Just wind moving through the grass. Just cattle shifting their weight, unbothered by any of it. $14 a head, Rowena said. "Or you can drive all the way back down that road and try your luck with somebody who doesn't know better." Dunmore stared at her a long moment. Then he laughed, short, surprised, like the sound had been startled out of him. 12, he said. "Final offer. 13. And you throw in the transport wagon for the trip." He looked at her again. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not quite respect, but close enough to it that Rowena felt the ground under her feet solidify just a little. 13, he agreed. "Deal." They shook on it. His hand swallowed hers whole, but her grip didn't waver. What Rowena didn't know, what she had no way of knowing, standing there in the cold, with mud on her hem, and a small, hard-won victory sitting warm in her chest, was that she wasn't alone on that ridge. A rider had stopped on the rise above the pasture, far enough to be unseen, close enough to see everything. He'd been on his way somewhere else that morning. A different errand entirely, but he stayed on that ridge until the deal was done, until Dunmore's wagon rolled off down the valley road $13 a head poorer than he'd planned to be. And the rider just watched. Watched the way she stood. Watched the way she didn't flinch. Watched the way a girl in a torn dress had just outnegotiated a man twice her size, without raising her voice once. Then he turned his horse and rode on toward the Blackwood house, because he had a courting visit to make. Except it wasn't going to go the way anybody expected. Least of all Rowena. She didn't find out about the visitor until she was already halfway back to the house. Cattle deal settled, mud drying stiff on her boots. The wagons in the yard should have warned her. 3 of them, fine horses, a polish on the leather tack that made the Blackwood barn look even shabbier by comparison. Rowena! Verity's voice cracked across the yard like a whip. Get inside. Now, wash up. You are not to be seen looking like that. Like what? Like a stable hand, because that's what she was most days. Nobody seemed to see the contradiction in that. Nobody seemed to care. Rowena slipped in through the back into the tiny room that used to belong to a housekeeper before there was no money left to keep one. She poured water into the chipped basin, scrubbed her hands until the mud came off in gray streaks, changed into the least mended of her 2 dresses. Through the thin wall she could hear it, the parlor, alive with voices, her father's booming, false hearty welcome, Camille's laugh, bright and practiced, and a man's voice, deep, unhurried. Rowena didn't catch the words, just the shape of them. She told herself she didn't care. She almost believed it. Rowena, the tea tray. Now, Verity's voice hissed through the crack in the door. Because of course, because even on the day she wasn't supposed to exist, there was still tea to pour. Rowena carried the tray down the hall into the parlor, keeping her eyes low the way she'd learned to, the way that made her invisible, the way that made this bearable. Her father stood in the center of the room, one hand extended, voice booming with a heartiness that hadn't been genuine in years. Mr. Garrison, what an honor. We've been so looking forward to your visit. And there he was, Nathaniel Garrison, younger than Rowena expected, sun-brown skin, a build that came from actual work, not just money pretending to be work, a thin scar along his jaw that told a story nobody in this parlor was going to ask him about. And eyes, gray, steady, the kind of eyes that didn't just look at a room, they read it. Rowena set the tray down, poured, kept her hands steady, because her hands were always steady, even when everything else wasn't. Miss Blackwood. His voice when he spoke to Camille was polite, correct, a little distant. Mr. Garrison, we're so pleased you could come all this way, Camille said, her smile arranged like porcelain. I do hope the ride wasn't too tiring. Wasn't bad. Short, clipped, not unkind, just economical. Like he didn't waste words on things that didn't matter. Rowena poured his tea without meeting his eyes. Except he was already looking at her. She felt it before she saw it. That particular weight of being observed. Not the dismissive glance servants usually got. Something else. Something that made her hand pause for half a second, over the teapot, before she caught herself and kept pouring. He didn't say anything, just watched. Then looked away, back toward her father, like nothing had happened at all. Rowena told herself it was nothing. She almost believed that too. So, Mr. Garrison, her father said, settling into the good chair, the one that wasn't splitting at the seams. Your father's ranch, 20,000 acres, I hear. Depends on the year. Expanding, I'd imagine. We're looking at some things. Nathaniel's tone stayed even. Careful. Timber rights. Water agreements. Ambitious. Her father's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. And I understand you're looking to settle down. Establish a household of your own. That's the idea. Camille leaned forward, all soft interest. And what sort of wife are you hoping to find, Mr. Garrison? Someone accomplished, I'd imagine. Someone refined. For a moment, Nathaniel didn't answer. He set his teacup down. The click of porcelain against saucer seemed too loud in the sudden quiet. I'm hoping to find someone who won't fall apart the first time things get hard, he said finally. Refined doesn't mean much to me. Strong does. The room shifted, just slightly, like a held breath. Well, her father said, recovering with a forced laugh. Camille here has been raised with the finest education money could afford. French, piano. She'd make any man a fine. Actually, Nathaniel said, standing, I'd like to see your stock. Your man at the gate mentioned some cattle went out this morning. Sold well, I heard. Silence. Rowena's hand froze on the teapot. Because how would he know that? Because the deal had closed less than 2 hours ago. Because nobody in this parlor had said a word about it yet. Her father started, clearly caught off guard. I wasn't aware. Rowena handled it, Verity said quickly, her voice tight, with something that might have been embarrassment, might have been warning. She does the ranch work. It's not really. I'd like to speak with her, Nathaniel said. If that's all right. Every head in the room turned. Camille's smile had gone brittle at the edges. Her father's face had drained a shade paler. Verity looked like she'd swallowed a stone. And Rowena stood there, with the teapot still in her hand, feeling the weight of every eye in the room land on her at once. Me? She said. You, Nathaniel said. If you don't mind. Because why would he want to talk to the girl in the mended dress? Because this wasn't how any of this was supposed to go. Because Rowena had spent her whole life being furniture in this house, and furniture didn't get spoken to directly. Furniture didn't get chosen. Except here he was, choosing. The walk out to the yard felt like the longest 100 yards of Rowena's life. She could feel her family's stairs boring into her back the whole way, could practically hear Verity's fury building behind clenched teeth. You don't have to do this, Rowena said, once they were out of earshot of the porch. Whatever this is. Saw you this morning, Nathaniel said. On the ridge above the south pasture. Her stomach dropped. You were watching. Wasn't planning to. Happened to be riding this direction. Stopped when I saw the negotiation starting. So you saw me argue with a cattle buyer. I saw you win, Nathaniel corrected. $13 a head off a man, who came in low, hoping nobody would push back. That's not luck. That's skill. Rowena crossed her arms. It's just cattle. It's not just cattle. It's knowing your worth and making somebody else acknowledge it out loud. He studied her, that same steady, unhurried gaze from the parlor. That's rare. Rarer than pretty. Rarer than polished. Mr. Garrison, your sister's lovely, he said, cutting her off gently. I could see that the moment I walked in. Delicate. The kind of lovely that gets protected, not tested. And I've had a lifetime of people trying to protect me into a corner. I don't need delicate. I need somebody who's already survived being tested. The words hit somewhere Rowena wasn't ready for. Because nobody talked to her like this. Because nobody had ever looked at her rough hands, and her mended dress, and called any of it valuable. You don't know anything about me, she said, quieter now. I know your fence lines held together, with wire and stubbornness. I know you fed those cattle better than most ranchers twice your age manage. I know you just talked a grown man into raising his offer 40% without losing your temper once. Nathaniel's jaw tightened slightly. I know enough. Rowena's heart was doing something strange in her chest. Something she didn't have a name for, and didn't particularly want one. What is it you're actually asking me, Mr. Garrison? I'm asking if you'd consider marrying me. The words landed in the cold morning air, and just hung there. Rowena felt her breath catch. Felt the ground tilt just slightly under her boots. That's insane, she said. Probably. You don't even know me. I know enough to know I'd rather build something with somebody who's already proven she can survive hard things than spend my life next to somebody who's never had to. My father will never allow. That's not really his choice to make. Nathaniel's voice was steady, certain. It's yours. Because there it was. The word she'd never heard directed at her before. Choice. They walked back to the house in a silence that felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Rowena's mind was racing in a dozen directions at once, and none of them were landing anywhere solid. Because this can't be real. Because men like Nathaniel Garrison didn't choose girls like her. Except he just had. Which meant something was about to break wide open in that parlor, and Rowena had about 30 seconds to decide whether she was ready for it. She wasn't. She walked in anyway. The parlor had transformed into something closer to a courtroom by the time they returned. Her father stood rigid near the fireplace. Verity beside him, arms crossed so tight her knuckles had gone white. Camille sat frozen in her chair, the porcelain smile completely gone now, replaced by something sharper, something scared. "Mr. Garrison," her father said, forcing warmth back into his voice. "I trust the stock met your satisfaction." "The stock was fine," Nathaniel said. "But that's not what I came to discuss." He turned to face the room, faced all of them, didn't flinch. "I'd like to formalize a courtship with Rowena." The room went silent in a way that felt almost violent. Camille made a small, strangled sound. "What? This is..." Her father's voice cracked slightly. "This is highly unexpected, Mr. Garrison. Rowena is not. She hasn't been prepared for. I've made my choice." "But why?" Camille's voice rose, thin and desperate. "What does she have that I don't?" Nathaniel looked at Rowena. "Long, steady. Grit," he said simply. The word landed like a slap across the room. "She's worthless." Her father exploded, finally turning the full weight of 21 years of contempt directly onto Rowena's face. "Do you understand what you're choosing, Mr. Garrison? She has no dowry, no education. She's a servant in her own home, because that's all she's ever been good for." Something in Rowena's chest cracked wide open, because she'd always known. But hearing it said out loud in front of witnesses with such flat, casual certainty, that was different. That gutted her. "Mr. Blackwood," Nathaniel said quietly, "with respect, you're wrong." The room held its breath. "I've spent the last hour watching your family," Nathaniel continued, voice calm but hard, as flint underneath. "One daughter can play piano and speak French. The other kept this ranch from collapsing entirely, while everyone else pretended not to notice. You've got a showpiece and a workhorse, Mr. Blackwood, and you've spent 21 years polishing the wrong one. How dare? So yes, I'm choosing Rowena." Nathaniel turned to look at her, and something in his expression softened, just slightly. Not despite the calluses. Because of them. Every eye in the room turned to Rowena, waiting, because this was the moment, because everything before this had just been prelude. Because whatever she said next was going to blow her whole life apart, one way or the other. "Rowena." Her father's voice had gone dangerous now. "If you do this, if you embarrass this family by throwing yourself at a man clearly toying with you, you will not be welcome back. Do you understand me?" "I understand," Rowena said, "that you've spent 21 years telling me I don't matter." "That's not. I fixed the fences," she said, louder now, years of swallowed words finally breaking loose. "I mended the tack. I fed the horses. I sold every last head of cattle we owned this morning for $4 more a head than you would have gotten, and I did it all while you dressed Camille up like a prize to sell to the first rich man, who looked twice." "How dare you speak to your father?" "I dare," Rowena cut in, "because I have nothing left to lose. You already made that clear." She turned to Nathaniel. Her hands were trembling now, but her voice held steady. "You're offering me a choice." "I'm offering you a way out," Nathaniel said. "It won't be easy." "Nothing's been easy," Rowena said. "At least this time it'll be mine." Her father's face had gone the color of ash. "Then you are no longer welcome in this house," he said. "You are no longer a Blackwood. Do you understand? You'll have nothing." Rowena held his gaze, didn't look away, not once. "Then maybe," she said, "I'll finally have something in common with the Blackwood name after all." The silence that followed was total. broken only by Camille, whose voice came out thin and furious. You did this on purpose. You've been planning this. I've been planning nothing, Rowena said. I went to sell cattle this morning, Camille. That's all I did. He was supposed to choose me. He wasn't supposed to do anything, Rowena said quietly. That's the part nobody in this house ever understood. People aren't supposed to do anything. They choose. Camille's eyes filled with furious tears. You'll regret this. He'll grow tired of you within a month. And when he does, don't come crawling back here, because there won't be anything left to crawl back to. Rowena didn't answer that, because some fights weren't worth finishing. Because some doors, once you saw what was actually on the other side of them, you didn't want to walk back through. It was Verity who said the thing that finally cracked the whole scene open. You can't do this, she snapped at Ambrose, low and urgent, thinking herself unheard. We need the garrison money. If Rowena marries into that family, and we've thrown her out. Ambrose the loan. She stopped herself too late. Nathaniel's eyes sharpened. What loan? Silence. A long, ugly silence. Ambrose Blackwood's face went from ash gray to something closer to green. That's a private family matter. You owe my father money, Nathaniel said. It wasn't a question anymore. A modest arrangement, Ambrose said stiffly. Nothing that concerns. 60% of what this ranch is worth, Verity said, bitterness leaking through the crack she'd already opened. That's what he owes. 2 years now. Which is exactly why this family cannot afford to insult the Garrisons. Ambrose, whatever your pride. Verity, I'm done protecting your pride, while we starve, Ambrose. Because there it was. The truth, finally, dragged out into the light of the parlor for everyone to see. Rowena stood very still, something cold and clear settling into place behind her ribs. Because that note her father had insisted come due at the end of the month, the one that had sent her to sell every last head of cattle this ranch owned, had never had anything to do with the herd's own survival. It had everything to do with this, with the debt he owed the very family standing in this room. Because her father had called her worthless not 15 minutes ago, while owing the Garrisons a debt he had no way of paying, while letting Camille believe her marriage would save them, when the truth was, her father's pride had already put this family in the Garrisons' debt long before any courtship had begun. You've known, Rowena said slowly, looking at her father. This whole time, you've known you owed his family money. That's why you wanted every head sold. And you still called me worthless in front of him. Ambrose said nothing. There was nothing left to say. I think, Rowena said, that answers every question I ever had about what this family actually thinks of me. She didn't remember climbing the stairs to pack. One moment she was standing in the parlor, the next she was in her tiny room at the back of the house, pulling a small bundle together, with hands that wouldn't quite stop shaking. 2 dresses, pair of boots, her mother's small silver locket, one of the only things Ambrose hadn't sold off in the bad years. A photograph, faded at the edges. Not much, 21 years, and this was all of it that mattered. Camille appeared in the doorway, face blotchy from crying, voice low and venomous. He's using you, she said. You know that, don't you? This is about humiliating Papa, proving some kind of point, and the second he's made it, he'll throw you out just like everyone else has. Maybe, Rowena said, tying off the bundle. And you're going anyway. Yes. Why? Camille's voice cracked. Why would you do this to me? Rowena turned to face her sister fully. I'm not doing anything to you, Camille. I'm choosing something for myself. For the first time in my life. It's not a choice. It's a mistake. And when you come crawling back, if they even let you crawl back, I won't, Rowena said quietly. Goodbye, Camille. Her sister didn't answer, just stood in the doorway, silent tears running down a face that had never once had to work for anything. Rowena didn't look back. Nathaniel was waiting by the horses when she came out, exactly where he said he'd be. Her father and Verity stood frozen on the porch, faces carved from something that wasn't quite stone, and wasn't quite regret either. Last chance, Nathaniel said quietly. You can still change your mind. Can I? Rowena looked back at the house, at the peeling paint, at her father's hollow anger, and her stepmother's cold fury. Feels like I made this choice a long time ago. I just didn't know it until this morning. Nathaniel's mouth curved, something warm breaking through the careful composure for the first time all day. Yeah, he said. I know that feeling. He helped her onto the second horse, a steady bay mare with kind eyes. Rowena. Her father's voice cracked across the yard one final time. If you ride away with this man, you are no longer my daughter. Do you understand? Nothing. You'll be nothing. Rowena turned in the saddle to look at him one last time. Then I suppose, she said, I'll finally have something in common with the Blackwood name, because it never meant much of anything to me either. She turned her horse toward the road and didn't look back again. Not once. They rode in silence for the first mile, the Blackwood ranch shrinking behind them, smaller and smaller, until it was just a smudge of gray against the horizon. Rowena's whole body felt strange, light in a way she didn't have a word for, like something that had been sitting on her chest for 21 years had finally, suddenly, lifted. You all right? Nathaniel asked. I don't know, Rowena admitted. Is that all right to say? It's honest. Then yes, I don't know if I'm all right, but I'm not sorry. That's a start. They rode on, as the sun climbed higher, burning the frost off the grass, turning the whole valley gold. Rowena's mind kept circling back to the parlor, to her father's face, to the debt nobody had ever bothered to mention to her, even as they called her worthless to her face. Your father's going to hate me, she said finally. Isn't he? The moment he sees me. Nathaniel's jaw tightened, just slightly. He's hard to predict, he said. But I didn't bring you home to be liked, Rowena. I brought you home because I meant what I said back there. About the calluses. About all of it. Rowena looked over at him. Really looked, for the first time, since the parlor, past the fine coat and the easy confidence, to something tired underneath it. Something that looked unexpectedly a little like her. Tell me about him, she said. Your father. Before we get there. Nathaniel didn't answer right away. He built everything we have from nothing, he said finally. And he's spent every day, since making sure nobody ever forgets it. He's not going to make this easy on you. I don't need easy. Good, Nathaniel said, because that's not what's coming. The Garrison Ranch appeared on the horizon just past midday, and nothing Rowena had imagined prepared her for the scale of it. The main house sprawled across the valley floor, 3 stories of dark timber and river stone, porches wrapping every level. Behind it, barns bigger than the entire Blackwood property. Cattle scattered across pastures that seemed to stretch clean to the mountains. This wasn't a ranch. It was a kingdom. Still time to turn back, Nathaniel said, though his voice carried no real hope in it. Rowena's hands tightened on the reins. Her legs ached from hours in the saddle. Her clothes were stiff with dust. Every instinct in her screamed that she was about to make the single biggest mistake of her life. But there was nowhere left to turn back to. Let's get this over with, she said. They rode down the long approach, and Rowena felt eyes track them the whole way. Ranch hands paused mid-task to stare. A woman hanging laundry let a sheet fall straight back into the basket. The front door swung open before they'd even fully stopped. Magnus Garrison stood in the doorway like something carved out of old leather and older iron, shorter than Rowena expected. But he filled that doorway like a furnace fills a room with heat you feel before you see the fire. You're late, Magnus said. His voice didn't need to be raised to carry across the whole yard. I expected you hours ago. Had business to finish, Nathaniel said, dismounting. He didn't move to soften anything for his father. Didn't show the deference most sons might. Business. Magnus' gaze slid past his son, landed on Rowena, and stayed there. Cold. Assessing. like a man pricing a piece of land he already suspected was worthless. "This is your business? Some ranch girl in a torn dress?" "This," Nathaniel said, voice going hard, "is Rowena Blackwood, my fiancée." The word dropped into the yard like a stone into still water. For a long moment Magnus didn't move, didn't blink. Then his mouth curled into something that might have passed for a smile on a warmer man. On him it looked like a blade catching light. "No," he said simply. "I wasn't asking permission." "Then let me be clear." Magnus descended the porch steps slowly, deliberately, like a man used to every room bending around him. "You will not marry this girl. You will return her wherever you found her, and you will finish the arrangement I've already made for you. That is not a request, Nathaniel. The only fact that matters," Nathaniel said, "is that I'm marrying Rowena. You can accept it, or you can fight it, but you can't stop it." Magnus' cold eyes finally shifted fully onto Rowena. Really looked at her, and Rowena understood, in that single unblinking moment, exactly why men in this territory feared Magnus Garrison. There was no warmth in that gaze, just calculation. "What's your family name, girl?" Rowena lifted her chin. "Blackwood. Blackwood." Magnus rolled the name around like something distasteful. "Ambrose Blackwood's daughter. The man drowning in debt, with a ranch falling down around his ears." Heat flooded Rowena's face, but she kept her voice level. "That's the one. And he sent you here to trap my son." "He didn't send me anywhere," Rowena said. "I chose to come." Magnus' laugh was short, ugly. "You chose. That's rich." He stepped closer, close enough that Rowena had to fight not to step back. "Let me tell you what you actually chose, Miss Blackwood. You chose to trade one kind of poverty for the illusion of wealth. You chose to climb above your station because a rich man's son looked at you twice." "Father!" "No." Rowena's voice cut through, steadier than she felt. "Let him finish. I want to hear all of it." Magnus' eyebrows lifted slightly. Surprise, maybe, or something close to it. "Fine." His voice went flat, precise. Each word aimed to wound. "You're nothing. No education. No name worth having. No dowry. You can't help this ranch. You can't help my son. The moment he comes to his senses, you'll be sent back to whatever falling down house you crawled out of." The words hit like fists. Rowena had heard cruelty her whole life, but never delivered with such surgical, total certainty. "Are you finished?" she asked quietly. Magnus blinked. "Excuse me?" "I asked if you were finished, because if you are, I'd like to respond." "There's nothing to respond to. Those are facts." "Then here are some facts of my own." Rowena took a step forward, chin still lifted, voice steady even, as her heart hammered against her ribs. "You're right. I have no education, no dowry, nothing that makes me suitable for your son by the standards this room seems to care about. But I can ride. I can rope. I can mend a fence with wire and my bare hands and keep a ranch standing when the man who owns it is too proud to admit it's failing. I sold every head of cattle my family owned this morning for $4 more per head than my own father would have gotten. If that makes me worthless in your eyes, Mr. Garrison, then you understand a lot less about ranching than you think you do." Silence. Total. Complete. Even the wind seemed to have gone quiet. Magnus studied her for a long, unreadable moment. Then, unexpectedly, something shifted behind his eyes. Not warmth. Nothing close to warmth. But something that looked just slightly like a man revising a number he'd been too quick to write down. "She's got teeth," he said finally, turning to Nathaniel. "I'll give her that." "She's got more than teeth," Nathaniel said. Magnus' gaze slid back to Rowena, cold and calculating all over again. "Teeth without breeding," he said, "are just another problem waiting to happen." He turned toward the house. "Bring her to dinner tonight. We'll see how she handles a table before I decide anything further." "This isn't your decision to make," Nathaniel said. "Everything on this ranch," Magnus said without turning back, is my decision, until I'm in the ground. You'd do well to remember that. He paused at the door, looked back at Rowena one final time. Dawn tomorrow, he said. North Ridge. Rough terrain, 15 miles. If you can sit a horse the way you claim you can, you'll prove it there. If you can't, his mouth curved again, that same cold, almost smile. You can pack your things before breakfast. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a finality that seemed to shake the whole porch. Rowena let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her hands trembled, whether from anger or fear or something else entirely. She couldn't say. Well, Nathaniel said quietly beside her. That went about as well as I expected. That was him being reasonable? That was him showing restraint. Nathaniel's jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the closed door. He didn't forbid it outright, which means he's already planning something. Can I survive whatever that something is? Nathaniel looked at her, and for the first time, since the parlor that morning, something almost gentle passed across his expression. Most people, he said, would have run the moment he opened his mouth. I've been called worthless my whole life, Rowena said. At least he was creative about it. Nathaniel laughed, short and surprised, though the sound didn't quite reach his eyes. Come on, he said. Let me show you where you'll be staying before he thinks of something else to test you on. Rowena followed him toward the grand house that was, as of this morning, apparently going to be her home. Her legs ached. Her hands were raw. Her family had disowned her in the space of a single sentence. And somewhere behind that towering front door, a dying king of a man had just given her, until sunup tomorrow to prove she belonged here. Not much time. She'd survived worse odds with less warning. She just hoped, riding up that ridge at dawn tomorrow, that it would be enough. The ridge was still black when Rowena swung up into the saddle. For in the morning, cold enough to bite, Magnus Garrison already mounted, waiting, that black gelding standing steady beneath him like it had been carved from the same iron as its rider. You're on time, he said, like that surprised him. Told you I would be. Told me a lot of things yesterday. Rowena didn't answer that, because there wasn't a version of that answer that wouldn't sound like begging. And she hadn't ridden all day from a home that didn't want her just to start begging for one. That didn't either. A stable hand led out her horse. Chestnut mare, Greenbroke, eyes rolling white at the edges. Of course he'd given her the difficult one. She's skittish, Magnus said. Spooks at shadows. You'll earn every mile. Good, Rowena said. I don't trust anything that comes easy anyway. Something flickered across Magnus' face, there and gone, before she could name it. She filed it away regardless. Hope was too dangerous a thing to spend early. She swung up. The mare sidestepped, ears pinned. Rowena sat deep, waited, let the animal feel there was nothing to fight. The mare settled. Magnus' eyebrows twitched half an inch. Try to keep up, he said, and turned his horse toward the trail without waiting to see if she would. 15 miles. Rock. Scree. Slopes steep enough to make her stomach drop. The kind of terrain that didn't forgive mistakes and didn't care how tired your legs already were. Because that was the whole point. Because Magnus Garrison wasn't testing her riding. He was testing whether she'd quit. Twice the mare balked at a jump, and Rowena's whole body went weightless, with fear half a second, from losing her seat completely. Twice she gripped, with her knees, found her balance, refused to let it show. Magnus said nothing, just watched, just kept riding, just kept pushing the pace like he was daring her to fall behind. She didn't. By the time they crested the final ridge, the sun was cracking gold over the valley, and Rowena's thighs burned like fire, and her lungs felt scraped raw. Magnus finally slowed. Not bad, he said. 2 words. Might have been the closest thing to praise the man was built to give. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. He turned to face her fully, sweat and dust on both their faces, breath fogging in the cold. That was the easy part. Riding's one thing. Surviving what's coming is another. What's coming? Magnus' jaw tightened. Politics, he said. Enemies. A judge who thinks this ranch owes him something. You marry my son, you become a target for every one of them. Then I'll learn to be a hard one to hit. Magnus almost smiled. Almost. We'll see, he said, and turned his horse back toward home. Word travels fast on a ranch this size. By the time Rowena dismounted in the yard, half the hands had already heard she'd made the 15 miles, without falling once. Word traveled faster than she did, apparently, because when she led the mare toward the barn, a grizzled man, with a face like weathered leather, was waiting by the stall door, arms crossed. You're the one, he said. Depends what you heard. Heard you sat that mare all the way up the north ridge, without breaking your neck. That's about right. The man studied her a long moment. Cutter, the foreman. Rowena had heard the name whispered around the yard already, always with a kind of wary respect. This ain't work for a lady, Cutter said finally. Rowena felt her spine straighten. Funny, she said, because it was work for this lady about 6 hours ago. Cutter's mouth twitched. Something almost like the start of a laugh, quickly swallowed back down. We'll see how long that lasts, he said and walked off, which wasn't a welcome, but it wasn't a dismissal either. Rowena decided she'd take it. That afternoon, Magnus summoned her to his study. The room smelled like leather and old tobacco and something underneath that Rowena couldn't name yet. Ledgers stacked on every surface. Maps pinned to the walls, red ink marking boundary lines that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. Sit, Magnus said, not looking up, from the papers spread across his desk. Rowena sat. You're going to learn this ranch, he said. Not the cattle, not the fences, the business underneath it, contracts, water rights, the parts that actually keep an empire standing. Why? Because my son thinks with his heart too much. Magnus' eyes finally lifted, cold and assessing. And when I'm gone, this place is going to need someone who can think with something colder. You're dying, Rowena said. It wasn't a question. She'd seen the way he moved, that morning, careful in a way that had nothing to do with age. Seen the color under his skin, gray in places it shouldn't have been. Magnus' expression didn't change. A year, he said. Maybe less. And you're telling me this because you're the only person in this house I've met in 20 years who doesn't flinch when I say something true. He pushed a ledger across the desk toward her. Start reading. The lessons went on for days. Contracts written to favor garrison interests, and how to spot the loopholes buried 3 clauses deep. Water rights, secured through paperwork, that skirted close enough to fraud, that Rowena's stomach turned reading it. Political favors, traded like currency, veiled just enough to survive a courtroom. Magnus watched her face the whole time, testing, waiting for the flinch that never came. You're smarter than I expected, he said one afternoon, 3 weeks in. Maps spread across the desk, showing land marked in red ink, neighboring ranches' water sources, timber stands. My father wasn't smart, Rowena said. Taught me a lot about what not to do. Ambrose Blackwood couldn't spot a lie if it bit him. Magnus' voice was dismissive. That's why he's drowning. That's why I know how to spot a failing operation, Rowena said, tapping the map. Like this one, you're trying to expand into 6 directions at once. That's not strength. That's a man trying to build his legacy faster than his time's running out. The room went very still. Explain, Magnus said. Quiet. Dangerous quiet. Rowena didn't back down. 6 negotiations at once means 6 legal battles. 6 chances for something to go wrong. And if even one collapses, it could bring the whole expansion down with it. She met his eyes. I watched my own family bleed out trying to look bigger than they were. I know what it looks like right before it breaks. For a long moment, Magnus said nothing. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. Sharp. Genuine. You've got more nerve than my son, he said. Fine. What would you do instead? Pick 3. Not 6. The ones that actually matter: water, timber, and whatever connects your current land. Negotiate hard, but fair. Build loyalty instead of resentment. Loyalty's expensive. So is fighting 6 wars at once. Magnus studied her for a long, unreadable moment. Then he rolled up the map. We'll discuss it further, he said, which Rowena was starting to learn was as close to your right as the man ever got. Dinner that night brought guests. Rowena hadn't been warned. Should have expected it, she thought later, because nothing on this ranch ever came without warning attached to the wrong end of it. She walked into the dining room in the plainest dress she owned, and found 4 place settings instead of 3, and a woman already seated, who looked at Rowena like she was something tracked in on somebody's boot. Judge Thistlewood, Magnus said, by way of introduction, gesturing to the silver-haired man rising from his chair, and his niece, Adelaide. The judge's smile was smooth as poured glass. Miss Blackwood, he said, we've heard so much. Have you? Rowena said. Not quite a question. Adelaide's eyes swept over Rowena's dress, her hands, her hair, cataloging every imperfection, with the practiced cruelty of someone who'd spent a lifetime being told her own reflection was the standard everyone else failed to meet. How rustic, Adelaide murmured. I do admire a woman who isn't afraid to look lived in. Thank you, Rowena said sweetly. I find most things that look untouched usually are. Nathaniel choked slightly on his wine. Judge Thistlewood's smile didn't waver, but something behind his eyes sharpened. Tell me, Miss Blackwood, he said, what do you know about running an operation this size? Nothing, Rowena said honestly. 3 weeks ago I was mending fences, with wire and stubbornness. But I know work. I know empires built on pretty words, and favors owed tend to collapse the moment real trouble shows up. And what would you know about real trouble? Adelaide asked, sweet as poison. I know what it's like to watch everything fall apart, while the people in charge pretend it's fine, Rowena said. I know what it's like to hold something together with nothing but will. And I know that when real trouble comes, not the kind you can charm your way out of, you need people who don't break. The table went quiet. Judge Thistlewood set down his fork. Slowly, deliberately. You've got a mouth on you, girl, he said. That'll get you in trouble one day. I've been in trouble my whole life, Rowena said. At least this time, I chose it. Something shifted in the judge's expression. A man recalculating a bet he'd assumed was already won. The kind of look Rowena was starting to recognize. The look of someone realizing the girl across the table wasn't the easy target they'd assumed. Because that was the thing nobody warned her about. Because being underestimated wasn't just an insult. It was a weapon if you knew how to use it. Later, on the porch, Nathaniel found her staring out at the dark fields. You made an enemy tonight, he said. Made 2, probably. Adelaide's uncle controls half the courts in this territory. Nathaniel's voice was careful. He's not someone you want circling. Then he shouldn't have brought his niece to insult me at my own dinner table. It's not your dinner table yet. It will be, Rowena said. Or it won't matter because none of us will have one. Nathaniel looked at her a long moment. Something in his expression she couldn't quite place. You're either the bravest person I've ever met, he said, or the most reckless. Why not both? He almost smiled. Yeah, he said quietly. I guess you can. The fire came 11 days later. Rowena was in the barn checking tack when the shouting started. Men's voices, raised and cracking with alarm. Horses driven hard, into the yard, lathered and wild-eyed. Fire! Someone was screaming. North grass stand. Winds driving it toward the faro line. Because of course it was. Because nothing on this ranch ever burned quietly. Magnus appeared on the porch, already dressed despite the hour, face like stone. How bad? Bad, sir. If it jumps the fence line onto faro land, there's no telling what happens next. Every able man. Now, the yard exploded into controlled chaos. Rowena ran for a horse without being asked twice. "You don't have to do this," Nathaniel said, catching her arm as she swung up into the saddle. "Watch me." The smoke hit them a mile out, thick, choking, the kind that made the whole sky look bruised. And when they crested the last ridge, Rowena saw it properly for the first time. Flames climbing through dry grass like something alive. Wind driving them east, straight toward Otis Pharaoh's land. Straight toward a fight that wouldn't end with fire. "We cut a break here," Magnus shouted over the roar. 20 yards wide, down to bare dirt. "If it crosses, we lose everything." They worked like something possessed, cutting brush, dragging it clear, digging until hands bled, and lungs burned raw, from smoke that seemed to fill every breath, before air could. Rowena worked beside Nathaniel, matching him swing for swing, refusing to slow down even, when her whole body screamed to, because stopping wasn't an option, because stopping meant losing everything they'd bled for in the last 3 hours. "This wasn't an accident," Nathaniel said between swings, voice tight. "How do you know?" "Grass doesn't catch itself. Not this time of year. Not this fast." His jaw was rigid. "Somebody set this." "Who?" "Take your pick." He swung the axe again, harder than the last time. "But if it crosses onto Pharaoh's land, he's going to think we did it. And then this stops being a fire." Rowena's stomach turned cold. "And starts being a war," she finished. They held the line for 3 hours. The fire reached the break and paused. Flames testing the barrier like something patient. Then the wind shifted, and slowly, agonizingly, the fire began folding back on itself and dying. They'd done it. But through the smoke, Rowena saw riders approaching. 12 men, armed, led by a gray-haired man on a paint horse, whose face was carved entirely from fury. "That's Otis Pharaoh," Nathaniel said quietly. "And he looks ready for blood." Pharaoh pulled up 20 yards, from where Magnus stood, hand resting on his gun. Men fanned out behind him. "You tried to burn me out," Pharaoh said, voice carrying across the scorched ground like a threat made flesh. "Don't be a fool, Otis," Magnus replied. "Why would I burn my own land to get to yours?" "Because you're desperate. Because you're dying, and you want my land before you go." Pharaoh's eyes were hard as flint. "I warned you, Garrison. I warned you I wouldn't be pushed." Men on both sides shifted, hands drifting toward weapons. Rowena felt the whole moment tilt toward disaster, one wrong word away from gunfire. She stepped forward before she could think better of it. "Mr. Pharaoh," she said, voice cutting clean through the tension. "My name's Rowena Blackwood. I've got no stake in whatever's between you and this family. But it seems to me, burning your own valuable grazing land is a strange way to steal somebody else's." Pharaoh's eyes narrowed. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone with no reason to lie to you," Rowena said. "Someone set this fire to make you two kill each other. And if you do, whoever said it wins without lifting another finger." Silence. Heavy. Pharaoh's jaw worked. "Who'd benefit?" he said slowly. "From us destroying each other?" "Somebody who wants this land weak enough to take," Rowena said. "Somebody who's been circling both your properties for months." Pharaoh's eyes flicked toward Magnus, something like doubt finally cracking through the fury. "The mining outfit," he said. "They've been sniffing round my northern line for weeks, offered me a fortune, threatened to take it when I said no." "They came to us too," Magnus said quietly. "Same offer, same threat." The silence stretched. Pharaoh's hand finally, slowly, dropped away from his gun. "If I find out you're lying to me, Garrison," he said, "there won't be enough men in this territory to save you." "Same goes," Magnus said. "But right now, we've got a bigger enemy than each other." Pharaoh's eyes moved back to Rowena, studying her the way Magnus had, the way everyone on this ranch seemed to, like they were trying to price something they didn't have a scale for. "You're the Blackwood girl," he said. "Not quite a question." "I am. You've got more sense than any Garrison I've met." He turned his horse. "We'll talk tomorrow. Neutral ground." As he rode off, Nathaniel caught Rowena's arm, steadying her as her knees finally buckled, from exhaustion and fear catching up all at once. "You just stepped between two armed groups ready to shoot each other," he said. "Somebody had to. That's insane." "Probably," Rowena said. "But it worked." Magnus found her that evening, washing soot from her hands at the well. "That was either very brave," he said, "or very stupid. Everyone keeps saying that like it's not both." Magnus almost smiled. "You stopped a war today," he said, voice quieter than she'd ever heard it. "I'll allow it." The relief didn't last long. 2 days later, a rider came in, from the south, with a letter that made Nathaniel's face go pale reading it. "What is it?" Rowena asked. "Judge Thistlewood." He handed her the letter. "He wants to see me. Alone. Tomorrow." "About what?" Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "About Adelaide," he said. "About an arrangement he apparently expects me to honor. One my father made years ago, before either of us had a say in it." Rowena felt something cold settle low in her stomach. "And if you refuse? Then he reminds me exactly how many permits, contracts, and land claims run through his courtroom," Nathaniel said, "and exactly how quickly all of them could stop being approved." The meeting happened in the judge's chambers in town. Rowena wasn't invited. She waited outside on a hard wooden bench for 2 hours, that felt like 10, imagining every possible version of what might be happening behind that closed door. When Nathaniel finally came out, his face told her everything before he said a word. "He wants an answer within the month," he said. "Marry Adelaide, or watch every permit this ranch needs get buried in paperwork until we're strangled by it. That's blackmail. That's the law," Nathaniel said bitterly. "When the man wearing the robe decides it is." Rowena's mind was already racing, because there had to be something. Because a man that comfortable using power like a weapon usually left fingerprints somewhere, if you knew where to look. "I need to see the ranch's old contracts," she said. "All of them. Every land claim your father's ever filed." Nathaniel looked at her, surprised. "Why?" "Because if Judge Thistlewood thinks he can bury us in paperwork," Rowena said, "then paperwork is exactly where I'm going to start looking for a way out." She spent the next several nights in Magnus' study long, after the house had gone quiet, working through decades of ledgers by lamplight, until her eyes ached, and her fingers were stained with ink. Because something about the numbers didn't sit right. Because there was a stretch a little over 20 years back, where land had changed hands in a way that didn't match anything she'd learned about how these things were supposed to work. Parcel. Northern boundary. Water rights attached. Bought, according to the ledger, from a man named Nathan Price. Except the purchase price was almost nothing. Except the date on the transfer didn't match the date on a separate legal filing 3 pages later, referencing the same land. Except when she pulled the original will listed as the source document, something about the signature made her stomach drop. Because she'd seen Magnus' handwriting for weeks now, on contracts, on letters, on the margins of ledgers he'd annotated himself. And the signature on Nathan Price's supposed will didn't just look similar. It looked like it had been traced. Rowena sat very still in the lamplight, the old document trembling slightly in her hands. Because if she was right, if what she was looking at was what it looked like, then the Garrison Empire hadn't just been built on hard work and good land. It had been built, at least in part, on something stolen. And somewhere out there, 20-some years later, a man named Nathan Price's family was still living with whatever came after. She didn't sleep that night. Not because of the fire. Not because of Judge Thistlewood's threats. Not because of Adelaide's poisoned smile at the dinner table. Because of a signature that didn't match. Because of a debt this family owed that had nothing to do with money. And because somewhere, tucked into the same drawer as this forged document, was a name she recognized, from a conversation she'd overheard weeks ago between 2 ranch hands, low-voiced, careful. Wendell Price, still living, still nearby, still, as far as Rowena could tell, with absolutely no idea what had actually happened to his father's land. She didn't tell Nathaniel right away. Because she wasn't sure yet. Because a document could be misread. A signature could be explained. And she wasn't about to hand a man his father's worst secret without being certain first. So she kept working, through the ledgers by night, quietly, while the ranch's daylight crises kept unfolding around her. The aftermath of the fire, the standing threat, from Thistlewood 100 smaller fires that needed putting out. Because Cassius Drummond, it turned out, hadn't stayed away either. The letter arrived, from her father's house less than 2 weeks after the fire, carried by a rider, who looked like he'd rather have been anywhere else delivering it. Rowena read it twice, before the words fully landed. Camille was to be married, within the month, to a man named Cassius Drummond. 60 years old, according to the letter. Wealthy beyond anything the Blackwood name had ever touched. And, according to whispers Rowena had already caught wind of from Cutter, a man whose first 2 wives hadn't lived especially long. Her stomach turned reading it. "You knew this man's name," she said to Nathaniel later, showing him the letter. "Drummond, I heard you mention him." The night of the fire. Nathaniel's face went very still. "Cassius Drummond," he said slowly, "is the same man who's been trying to buy Pharaoh's land for the mining outfit. The same man Pharaoh said threatened him." The room went cold around Rowena. "You're telling me," she said, "the man setting fire to grasslands to force a land sale is the same man my father just sold my sister to?" "I'm telling you," Nathaniel said, "that I don't think that's a coincidence." Rowena rode for her father's house the next morning, before anyone could talk her out of it. She hadn't planned to see any of them again, hadn't wanted to, but Camille's face kept surfacing in her mind, blotchy with tears in that doorway weeks ago, and something about it wouldn't let her stay away. Ambrose met her at the door like she was a stranger. "You have no business here," he said. "I'm here for Camille. She's getting married, to a good man, a wealthy one. He's the same man burning grassland to force ranchers off their own land," Rowena said. "Did you know that? Or did you just see the money and stop asking questions?" Ambrose's face flushed dark red. "You will not speak to me that way in my own. Where is she?" Camille appeared at the top of the stairs, before her father could answer, pale, thinner than Rowena remembered, eyes rimmed red. "Rowena," she said, voice small in a way it had never been before. "What are you doing here?" "Making sure you know what you're marrying," Rowena said. "I know what I'm marrying," Camille said, though her voice wavered. "A wealthy man who's going to save this family from the debt you left us drowning in when you rode off." The words stung, but Rowena held her ground. "Camille, I found out something about the man you're marrying. It isn't safe. Nothing's safe." Camille's voice cracked, raw and sudden. "You got to choose, Rowena. You got a millionaire cowboy riding up and choosing you like something out of a storybook. I got Papa's debts and Cassius Drummond, and that's the whole of my choices. So don't stand there and tell me about safe." The room went silent. Rowena felt something old and resentful in her chest finally give way, replaced by something closer to grief. "I'm not trying to hurt you," she said quietly. "I'm trying to warn you." "Then warn me, from a distance," Camille said, voice breaking. "Because every time you're in this house, Papa looks at me like I'm the only daughter he's got left worth anything. And I don't know how to feel about that. I don't know how to feel about any of this." Rowena didn't have an answer for that, because there wasn't a clean one, because some doors, once slammed, didn't open again just because you wanted them to. She left without saying goodbye, rode the whole way back to the Garrison Ranch, turning Camille's words over and over, unable to shake the ache lodged somewhere under her ribs. That evening, Nathaniel found her at the corral fence, staring out at nothing in the dark. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Badly," Rowena said. "She thinks I abandoned her." "Did you?" "I don't know anymore." Rowena's voice was quiet, tired in a way sleep wasn't going to fix. "I thought leaving meant saving myself. I didn't think about what it would look like from where she's standing." Nathaniel was quiet a moment. "You can't save someone who won't let you," he said finally. That doesn't make it easier. No, he agreed. It doesn't. They stood there in silence a while, the cold settling in around them, the weight of everything, the fire, the judge, the forged will Rowena still hadn't told him about, Camille's wedding barreling toward them like something none of them could stop, pressing down heavier by the hour. There's something I need to show you, Rowena said finally. In your father's study. Something I found in the old ledgers. Nathaniel's expression shifted, wary. What kind of something? Rowena hesitated, because once she said it, there was no taking it back. Because whatever this document meant, it was about to change everything between this family, and whatever peace they thought they'd built. The kind, she said slowly, that might explain why Judge Thistlewood thinks he owns this family outright. Nathaniel went very still. Explain, he said, the same word his father used, the same dangerous quiet underneath it. I think your father did something, Rowena said, a long time ago, something involving land that wasn't his to take. They went to the study together, the house dark and silent around them, and Rowena laid the old document out on the desk exactly where she'd found it. Nathaniel read it in silence. Read the signature twice. Read the dates, the discrepancy, the filing 3 pages later that didn't match anything else in the ledger. His face went the color of ash. This is Nathan Price's will, he said quietly. I think it's a forgery, Rowena said. I think your father traced the signature. That's not possible. My father. Nathaniel stopped himself, because the words wouldn't come out clean, because some part of him, Rowena could see, already believed it, before she'd finished saying it out loud. There's a son, Rowena said gently. Wendell Price. Still living nearby as far as I can tell. No idea what actually happened to his father's land. Nathaniel sat down heavily in his father's chair, staring at the document like it might rearrange itself into something less damning if he looked long enough. If this is real, he said slowly, and Judge Thistlewood knows about it, then that's not just leverage over a marriage, Rowena finished. That's leverage over everything this family owns. The candle between them guttered low, throwing long shadows across the walls covered in red-inked maps. Land that suddenly looked less like an empire and more like evidence. We have to find out for certain, Nathaniel said finally, before Thistlewood decides to use it first. And if it's true? Rowena asked. What happens to your father? Nathaniel didn't answer for a long moment. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows, carrying with it the faint smell of smoke that still hadn't quite cleared from the grass weeks after the fire. I don't know, he said finally. But I know we're not going to like the answer. Rowena looked down at the forged signature one more time, at the name Nathan Price written in a hand that wasn't his own. Because somewhere out there was a man who'd spent 20 years believing his family had simply lost everything, when the truth, sitting right here on this desk, said otherwise. And somewhere closer than that, a judge who might already know it, waiting, patient, ready to use it the moment it served him best. The morning after they found the forged will, Rowena woke before dawn out of habit, and lay still in the unfamiliar softness of her new bed, staring at the ceiling. Because she hadn't slept. Not really. Because every time she closed her eyes she saw that signature again. Traced, careful, almost perfect. Except almost wasn't perfect. Except almost was exactly the kind of mistake that could bring an entire empire down around the people living inside it. She dressed in the gray dawn light and went looking for Nathaniel and found him already in his father's study, the same document still spread across the desk, where they'd left it the night before. He hadn't slept either. You have to ask him, Rowena said. I know. Today. I know that too. Nathaniel's voice was rough, tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. I just don't know how you ask your father if he stole a dead man's land. You ask him plainly, Rowena said. Because if you don't, Judge Thistlewood will ask him first. And he won't be asking. He'll be telling. They found Magnus in the dining room, already at breakfast, moving slower than he had weeks ago. The cancer was taking more of him by the day now. Rowena had started to notice it in small things. The way his hand shook slightly around his coffee cup. The way he sat down like the effort of standing had cost him something. "You two look like you've seen a ghost," Magnus said, not looking up from his plate. "We might have," Rowena said. She set the document down in front of him. Magnus' eyes moved over it. Once, twice. His face didn't change at first. Didn't give anything away. Then his hand, the one holding the coffee cup, went very still. "Where did you find this?" he said. Quiet, flat. "In your own ledgers," Rowena said. "Under your own filing. Which means whoever hid it wasn't trying very hard to hide it from you." "That's not an answer to my question." "No," Rowena agreed. "But it's the truth. And I think you owe your son the truth, before someone else decides to hand it to him wrapped in something worse." Magnus set down his coffee cup with exaggerated care, like the china might shatter if he wasn't gentle enough. His eyes lifted, finally, to meet Nathaniel's. "Sit down," he said. "Both of you. There's something I should have told you a long time ago." The story came out slow, painful, like something being dug up that had been buried on purpose for good reason and didn't want to see daylight again. 22 years ago, Magnus said, nothing to his name, a ranch hand working for a man named Nathan Price, who'd treated him like family, taught him everything he knew about this land. "He was dying," Magnus said. "Told me he was leaving me a portion of the ranch in his will. Said I'd earned it. Said his own son had no interest in staying out here. And," Nathaniel's voice was hard, "and I got greedy," Magnus said. "I wanted more than a portion. So I found a man in town who could match a signature close enough to fool a judge, who wasn't looking too hard. And I took the whole thing instead of the piece I was owed." The room went silent, because there it was. Because 22 years of empire, laid bare in 4 sentences at a breakfast table, that suddenly felt very cold. "His son," Nathaniel said. "Wendell. What happened to him? Fought it in court. Lost. Didn't have the money for a real lawyer, and I made sure of that too." Magnus' voice had gone flat, hollow, a man reciting his own sins like a list he'd memorized, and never once said aloud. "Last I heard, he was scraping by on a small parcel near the northern border. Nothing like what should have been his." Rowena watched Nathaniel's face crumble by degrees. Watched a lifetime of believing his father built something honest come apart in real time. "Everything we have," Nathaniel said quietly. "It's built on this." "Not everything," Magnus said. "But enough." "How could you?" Nathaniel's voice cracked, and he stopped himself, jaw working, before he tried again. "How could you let me grow up thinking you built this, from nothing but hard work?" "Because the truth would have destroyed everything," Magnus said. "Including you. The truth is going to destroy everything anyway," Rowena said quietly. "Judge Thistlewood already knows, or close enough to it. He's using Adelaide as the leash and this," she nodded at the document, "as the whip he hasn't cracked yet." Magnus' eyes came up to hers, sharp despite the exhaustion underneath. "How do you know that?" "Because a man doesn't threaten to bury a ranch in paperwork over a simple marriage arrangement," Rowena said. "Not unless he's got something bigger sitting in his back pocket. I think he's known about this for years. I think he's been waiting for the right moment to use it." They rode out to find Wendell Price that same afternoon. Rowena hadn't planned to go, but Nathaniel asked her to, quietly, in a voice that sounded like a man who didn't trust himself to face this alone, and she found she couldn't say no. The Price parcel, when they found it, told its own story before anyone spoke a word. A small cabin, weathered gray, a handful of cattle grazing thin pasture. Fences mended the same way Rowena used to mend her own, wire and stubbornness holding together what money couldn't fix. A man came out onto the porch as they rode up. 50, maybe, face lined deep. From sun and years neither had been kind to him. "Garrison," he said, voice flat with something that had curdled long past anger into something colder. "Didn't expect to see a Garrison on this land again." "Mr. Price," Nathaniel said, dismounting slowly. I think you know why I'm here. Wendell's eyes moved to Rowena, then back to Nathaniel, and something in his expression sharpened. You found it, he said. Whatever it was. You found it. We found the will, Rowena said. The real one. Or what's left of the evidence pointing to it. Wendell's jaw tightened. For a long moment he said nothing, just stood there on his porch, with weathered hands gripping the railing like it was the only thing keeping him upright. My father died, he said finally. Thinking his own son had squandered everything, thinking I wasn't fit to hold what he'd built. His voice broke, just slightly, on the last word. That's the part nobody talks about when they talk about stolen land. It's not just the dirt. It's what it does to the people left standing on what's left. I know, Nathaniel said quietly. I can't undo 20 years, but I can give you back what should have been yours to begin with. Wendell's eyes narrowed, suspicious in the particular way of a man who'd learned the hard way, that promises from garrisons came with strings attached. Why now? He said. Why not years ago when it might have actually mattered? Because I didn't know, Nathaniel said. And because it matters now too. Maybe not as much as it should have. But it matters. Rowena stepped forward. Mr. Price, she said, this isn't charity. It's yours. Legally, morally, every way that counts. We're not asking you to forgive anybody. We're asking you to take back what was taken. Wendell studied her a long moment. You're the Blackwood girl, he said. The one who talked Pharaoh down off his horse during the fire. Word travels. It does out here. Something in Wendell's posture eased, just slightly. Not trust. Not yet. Just a door that had been bolted shut for 20 years, unlatching by half an inch. Fine. I'll hear you out. But understand something. Giving me back land doesn't erase what your father's lies cost my family. Don't expect gratitude for doing what should have been done 20 years ago. We don't expect gratitude, Rowena said. We expect to make it right, whatever that ends up looking like. They rode back in silence, the weight of the conversation settling heavy over both of them. He's not wrong, Nathaniel said finally. Giving the land back doesn't undo what happened. No, Rowena agreed, but it's a start. And starts matter even when they're 20 years late. Nathaniel was quiet a moment. Judge Thistlewood is going to use this, he said. The moment he finds out we're moving to correct it, he's going to use it as proof my father's guilty of exactly what he's been threatening to expose. Then we get ahead of him, Rowena said. How? Rowena had been turning the answer over in her mind since breakfast, since she'd first seen the shape of the whole ugly puzzle laid out on Magnus' desk. We don't wait for him to weaponize the truth, she said. We take it to a judge who isn't in his pocket. We make the correction legal, public, on our own terms, before Thistlewood ever gets the chance to make it a scandal instead of a reckoning. There's no judge in this territory who isn't at least a little afraid of Ezra Thistlewood. Then we find one outside the territory, Rowena said. Or we find enough evidence of what he and Cassius Drummond have been doing that being afraid of him stops being the safest option. Nathaniel looked at her, something shifting behind his eyes. You think Thistlewood and Drummond are connected? I think, Rowena said slowly, that a judge threatening to bury a ranch in permits over a marriage and a man burning grassland to force a land sale who happens to be marrying into the same family that judge is trying to control, that's not two separate problems. That's one problem wearing two faces. The proof, when it came from an unlikely direction. Cutter found Rowena in the barn a few days later, waiting until the other hands had cleared out before he spoke. Heard something, he said, down at the saloon in town. Fella from Drummond's crew, drinking more than he should have been, talking about the fire. Rowena's whole body went still. Talking how? Bragging, Cutter said. About how easy it was. Said Drummond paid good money to make it look like a grass fire started itself. Said the judge helped smooth over the paperwork after, made sure nobody looked too hard at where it started. You're certain? Wasn't drunk myself, Cutter said. Heard every word clear. Rowena's mind was already racing ahead. Because if that was true, if she could get that man to say the same thing sober in front of the right people, would he say it again? She asked. Somewhere it would count? Cutter's face was grim. For the right money, he said. A man like that would say his own mother set the fire. Then let's find the right money, Rowena said. And let's find him, before Drummond figures out his own man's been talking. Took 4 days to arrange. For days of careful, quiet work, moving through channels Rowena hadn't known existed a month ago, learning fast because she had no choice but to. A sworn statement, signed and witnessed in the office of a lawyer 2 counties over, safely outside Judge Thistlewood's reach. A hand shaking as it signed, more from fear of Drummond finding out than from any lingering loyalty to him. Documentation of the forged will, cross-referenced against Wendell Price's original claim, verified by a land surveyor with no ties to either family. And finally, records Rowena had spent long nights piecing together, from correspondence in Magnus' study. Letters between Judge Thistlewood and the mining company, careful in their wording, but damning in what they revealed once laid side by side. Pattern. Land pressured out of ranchers' hands, through fire, through debt, through threat, and a judge smoothing every step of it, through his courtroom in exchange for a share once the mining rights came through. This is enough, Nathaniel said, staring at the pile of evidence spread across his father's desk. This is more than enough. It has to be, Rowena said. Because we only get one chance to bring this into the light. If it fails, Thistlewood buries us, so deep we never see daylight again. Magnus insisted on being there when they took it public. Rowena had argued against it. He was weaker every day now, the cancer moving faster than any of them wanted to admit out loud. But he'd looked at her, with something fierce and immovable in his tired eyes, and said the words that ended the argument before it really started. I built the lie, he said. I'll stand there when it comes apart. The territorial courthouse in the county seat was smaller than Rowena expected. A plain wooden building, nothing like the grandeur of the Garrison Ranch or the polish of Judge Thistlewood's chambers. But it was neutral ground, presided over by a circuit judge with no ties to anyone in this fight, and that was exactly why they'd chosen it. Word had spread fast once the hearing was announced. By the time Rowena walked in beside Nathaniel, the gallery was already half full. Ranchers, townsfolk, Otis Farrow, arms crossed, watching everything with narrowed eyes. Wendell Price, sitting stiff and unreadable near the back. And near the front, dressed in dark, expensive silk, Judge Ezra Thistlewood sat beside his niece, with the composed confidence of a man who hadn't yet realized the ground was about to open beneath him. Cassius Drummond sat 2 rows behind, and beside him, pale and small in a gown too fine for the occasion, sat Camille. Rowena's chest tightened at the sight of her sister, because there hadn't been time to warn her, because whatever was about to happen in this room was about to change Camille's life too, whether she was ready for it or not. The circuit judge called the hearing to order, and the room fell into the kind of silence that felt like it was holding its breath. Nathaniel stood first, laid out the discovery of the forged will plainly, without flourish, presented Wendell Price's original claim, verified now by an independent surveyor, watched the gallery ripple, with murmurs as the truth about his own father's crime hung in the open air for the first time in 22 years. Magnus stood next. He looked smaller than Rowena had ever seen him, standing there in front of a room full of people who'd feared him for decades. But his voice, when it came, didn't shake. 22 years ago, he said, I forged Nathan Price's will and took land that was never mine to take. His son has lived with the consequences of that theft every day since. I'm not here asking for mercy. I'm here to correct what I broke, while I still have the chance to do it myself. The gallery erupted into low, urgent whispers. Judge Thistlewood's face had gone very still. Then Rowena stood, because this was the part that mattered most. Because this was the part that would determine whether justice in this territory belonged to the man in the expensive silk, or to the people he'd spent years quietly crushing. There's more, she said, voice carrying clean through the courtroom. Because Mr. Garrison's crime happened 22 years ago, but there's a newer one still unfolding. And it involves the man sitting in the front row of this gallery. Thistlewood's composure cracked, just slightly, at the edges. Miss Blackwood, he said, voice tight with warning. I'd think carefully before you say something you can't take back. I've thought about it very carefully, Rowena said. For 4 days, actually. She presented the sworn statement first. Read the words aloud, steady, unflinching, while Cassius Drummond's face went from confusion to fury to something close to panic in the space of a single paragraph. Then the letters, correspondence between Judge Thistlewood and the mining company, laid out clause by clause, showing a pattern that stretched back years. Land pressured loose through fire and debt and courtroom threats, funneled quietly into the hands of men willing to share the profits once the mineral rights came through. The gallery had gone utterly silent now. Not a whisper, not a breath wasted. This is fabrication, Thistlewood said, rising to his feet, voice sharp with something that no longer sounded quite so composed. Baseless accusations from a woman with no standing in this territory. The standing, the circuit judge interrupted, voice flat and final, belongs to the evidence, not the person presenting it. And I'd advise you to sit down, Judge Thistlewood, before your objections start looking like exactly what Miss Blackwood is accusing you of. Thistlewood sat, slowly, rigidly, the color draining from his face by the second. It took another hour for the whole ugly truth to unravel completely. Cassius Drummond, cornered, turned on the judge faster than anyone expected, desperate to save himself even as it damned him further. Admitting in halting, panicked fragments to paying for the fire, to the mining company's involvement, to years of quiet arrangements, with Thistlewood that had lined both their pockets, while ranchers across the territory lost their land one manufactured crisis at a time. By the time the circuit judge called for a recess, Judge Ezra Thistlewood's career, his reputation, his entire careful architecture of quiet power, had come apart in front of a courtroom full of witnesses, who would carry the story back to every corner of the territory before nightfall. Because that was the thing about a lie built on fear. Because fear only worked as long as nobody in the room was brave enough to say the truth out loud first. Camille found Rowena in the hallway outside the courtroom during the recess, pale and shaking, one hand pressed against the wall like she needed it to stay standing. Is it true? Camille said. All of it. About Cassius. It's true, Rowena said gently. He set the fire. He's been part of Thistlewood's whole scheme for months, maybe longer. Camille's face crumpled. I was supposed to marry him next month, she said, voice breaking. I was so angry at you for getting to choose. And this whole time, you didn't know, Rowena said. None of this is your fault, Camille. It doesn't feel that way. It never does, Rowena said. Not at first. Camille looked at her sister then, really looked, something shifting behind her eyes that hadn't been there in years. What happens now? She asked. To me, the engagement's void, Rowena said. Once his role in the fire and the fraud comes out in full, no court in this territory will hold you to an arrangement made with a man facing charges like his. You're free, Camille, not because anyone bought your freedom, because the truth already did. Something in Camille's shoulders eased, just slightly, like a weight she'd been carrying. So long she'd forgotten what it felt like to set it down. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that, she admitted. Nobody does the first time, Rowena said. You figure it out, one day at a time. That's all any of us are doing. The hearing resumed an hour later, and by the time it concluded, the pieces had all fallen into place with a kind of grim, satisfying finality. Judge Thistlewood was to be removed from the bench pending formal investigation by territorial authorities, his years of quiet corruption unraveling faster now that the first thread had been pulled. Cassius Drummond was charged with arson and fraud, his engagement to Camille dissolved on the spot, his reputation, the only currency that had ever really protected men like him, gone within the hour. And Nathan Price's land, the parcel stolen 22 years ago, through a forged signature and a young man's greed, was returned in full to Wendell Price, along with a formal, public acknowledgement of the wrong done to his family. Wendell didn't smile when it was finished. Didn't offer forgiveness either. But he shook Magnus' hand. And in a territory built on hard men and harder grudges, that single gesture meant something close to everything. They rode back to the Garrison Ranch, as the sun dropped low and gold over the mountains, exhaustion settling into every one of them like something physical. Magnus rode slower than usual. Rowena noticed it before Nathaniel did. The careful way his hands held the reins, the pallor under his weathered skin that hadn't been there that morning. "You should rest," she said, drawing her horse alongside his. "I will," Magnus said, "once we're home." But something in his voice made her stomach tighten, with a fear she didn't want to name yet. He collapsed 3 days later, during breakfast, his coffee cup shattering against the floor, before anyone could catch him. They carried him to his room, sent for the doctor. But everyone standing in that hallway already knew, in the particular silent way people know these things, that this was the beginning of the end, and there was nothing left for medicine to do but make the ending gentler. Rowena sat with him that first night, while Nathaniel paced the hallway outside, unable to bear watching his father fade in real time. "You did something good," Rowena said quietly in the low lamplight, "at the hearing, standing up, telling the truth in front of everyone. That took more courage than most men manage in a lifetime." Magnus' laugh was weak, papery. "Funny," he said. "Took me 60 years to find that kind of courage, and I only had a few weeks left to use it." "Better late," Rowena said, "than never." Magnus was quiet a long moment, his breathing shallow in the dark room. "Wendell Price," he said finally. "Did he say anything after he shook your hand?" Rowena said. "That's not nothing." "No," Magnus agreed softly. "It's not." He held on for 11 more days. Long enough to see the mining company's charter revoked once the extent of their dealings with Thistlewood came fully to light. Long enough to see Otis Farrow ride out personally to shake his hand across a fence line that had nearly become a battlefield weeks earlier. Long enough to see Camille, still pale but steadier by the day, come to the ranch and sit with Rowena on the porch, the two sisters slowly, carefully rebuilding something that had been broken since childhood. Long enough, too, for one final conversation with his son. Rowena wasn't in the room for that one. Nathaniel came out afterward, with his eyes red-rimmed, and didn't say what had passed between them, and Rowena didn't ask. Some things belonged only to a father and his son, even when, especially when, there wasn't much time left to say them. Magnus Garrison died on a clear, cold morning, the kind that turned frost to glass on the grass outside his window, not unlike the morning Rowena had first ridden onto this land months earlier. He died with his son on one side of the bed, and Rowena on the other, and his last words, when they came, were quiet and unexpectedly simple. "Build something better," he said, "than what I built." Then he was gone. The funeral drew a crowd larger than Rowena expected. Ranchers who'd feared Magnus for decades stood alongside men he'd wronged, and men he'd helped in equal measure, all gathered to bury a man who'd spent the last weeks of his life trying, imperfectly, to make peace with what he'd done. It wasn't redemption. Redemption wasn't really available to a dead man, not for what he'd taken. But it was something. A man who'd spent his final weeks trying, however late, to make things right, and a valley full of people who'd shown up to see it. Afterward, in the study that had once felt like a fortress, and now felt simply like a room full of ledgers and old grief, Nathaniel and Rowena sat together, the weight of everything finally, briefly, settling into something like stillness. "He left it all to us," Nathaniel said. "The ranch, everything." "I know. I don't want to build the same thing he built," Nathaniel said. "Even the honest parts of it. I don't want people working this land because they're afraid of what happens if they don't." Rowena thought of Cutter, gruff and grudging, who'd earned his place through years of loyalty that had never once been rewarded fairly. Thought of every hand on this ranch, who worked dawn to dusk for wages that barely covered the cost of surviving the winter. Then don't, she said. Build something different instead. Over the following weeks, they drew up new contracts for every hand on the Garrison Ranch. Fair wages, written plainly, witnessed and signed rather than promised and forgotten. A share of the herd's profit for every season worked, scaled honestly to the labor given. Land set aside, formally, for families like the Prices who'd been wronged in the Empire's early years. A standing commitment rather than a single one-time correction. Cutter read his own contract twice. Before he signed it, eyebrows raised the whole time. Never seen a ranch do it this way, he said. Maybe it's time somebody did, Rowena said. Camille stayed through the winter, slowly finding her footing in a life that no longer revolved around being chosen by someone else. She spoke once quietly about wanting to teach, about a schoolhouse 2 towns, over that needed someone who knew letters and numbers and had, in her own words, finally learned what it felt like to choose something for herself. Rowena helped her write the letter of application herself, the two of them sitting by the fire long past dark, something healing slowly between them that neither had words for yet. Spring came early, that year, the frost breaking sooner than usual, the valley turning green almost overnight. Rowena stood on the porch one evening, watching the last light fade gold, over land that no longer felt like a stranger's kingdom, and found Nathaniel beside her, quiet in the way he'd been quiet since his father's funeral. Not sad exactly, but changed. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Any of it? Leaving your family? Coming here?" Rowena thought about the question honestly, the way she'd learned to think about hard things, since the morning she'd first ridden away from everything she'd known. She thought about her father's contempt, and the debt he'd hidden even while calling her worthless. Thought about Camille's tears in that doorway and the slow, careful rebuilding happening between them now. Thought about Magnus, cruel and broken, and finally, at the very end, brave enough to tell the truth out loud. "No," she said finally, "not for a second. Even though it was hard?" "Especially because it was hard," Rowena said. "Easy things don't change anything. They just sit there, being easy while everything underneath them stays exactly the same." Nathaniel's hand found hers on the porch railing, steady and sure. "My father built an empire on fear," he said. "I don't know exactly what we're building instead, but I know I don't want to build it alone." "You won't have to," Rowena said, "because that was the whole of it in the end. Not a fortune, not a name, not even the fair contracts stacked neatly now in the study, where lies used to live. Just 2 people, standing on a porch at the edge of a valley neither had been born to inherit, choosing, deliberately, to build something worth the name. Something honest. Something that would still be standing, fair and unashamed, long after both their names had faded from anyone's memory. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Rowena Blackwood, no longer the wrong daughter, no longer furniture in someone else's house, felt something settle quietly into place behind her ribs. Not triumph exactly, just peace. Earned the hard way, one honest choice at a time.